Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. My name is Leah Fellmer. I am the Director of Alumni and Constituent Relations well, not here, this is my apartment, but at Ramaz. We are so excited to welcome all of you tonight to this really wonderful talk with our alum, Micole Horowitz Weitzman, and her author husband, Yaron. He's going to be talking to us, both of them will be talking to us tonight about Yaron's new book, Tanking to the Top, the Phillies 76ers and the most audacious process in the history of professional sports. We're really excited to have both of them tonight and everyone here who's in our chat. You'll notice that your microphones and videos and your cameras are off. This is just to allow an easier viewing process. You'll see me and Micole and Yaron in a moment. We'll do a short Q&A session at the end of tonight's talk. There's a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screens where you can send in questions that Yaron and Micole will answer for us. Micole is a public school psychologist, and Yaron is a sports author who's written for Bleacher, ESPN, The New Yorker, all of those wonderful spaces. Tonight's video is being recorded, and we will be posting it up on our alumni virtual campus, which is a YouTube channel that we've created for alumni created content to be shared with the Ramaz community. So that's alumni, parents, grandparents, friends, family, faculty, students, all of those things. If you have any questions about the channel itself or the videos that get posted, you can shoot me an email, alumni@ramaz.org. And I think that's just about everything. We are having Rabbi Lookstein will be addressing the community again tomorrow night, Thursday at 7 p.m. You should have gotten an email about it, and we'll be sending out much more information about that later tonight and tomorrow. So without further ado, I bring you Micole and Yaron. One second, guys. I'm just flailing with this. Hold on.
I got it. I'm good.
Oh, there we go. Beautiful.
Good?
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for letting me crash a Ramaz event. Or pretend I'm an alumni here. Because I'm Yaron, Micole.
Hello.
I guess I'm going to talk. Do you want to say anything before I start going?
Yeah, go.
Okay. I'm going to talk. Yeah, so I have a book, which you can see right here. It's a real thing. Tanking to the Top. It was always my dream to put out a book during a pandemic, so I'm glad that came true, which I can talk about. So I'll give my background a little bit about the book. I'll read a short section and then I'll take questions about anything really. MBA, the book, sports writing. I've used this joke before, but my takes on Beauty and the Beast, which I've watched a lot of recently because being home in a quarantine life. So I basically write for Bleacher Report, and this will connect to how I got to the book, and I'm an MBA writer for them. And the job ostensibly is it's a quote unquote national writer, which means you're supposed to find stories that would resonate with a national audience. To do that, and if you're living in New York to do that, that means you have to often leave New York to find basketball stories that an audience would like, because the Knicks and Nets usually are not cutting it. So I started going to Philadelphia pretty regularly, a lot of Amtrak, and thank you, Micole, for letting that happen. And around 2017, it's a few years ago. So I'm going to assume most people here are sports fans. So I assume I can name guys like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. And if you're not, I'm sorry. Please feel free to share anything or comment and just let me know if you need some more context. So the team was young, had some really good players, and I figured kind of getting in on the ground floor, so-called, would be good and beneficial both for my employer and for me. So I started going to games. Toward the end of the year, after the playoffs, I kind of thought, I always wanted to write a book, and I figured, this would be a good topic. Part of the reason I thought it'd be good because there was a whole background there. Also because, and I can get to this in a little bit, I said, I don't see anybody else writing this book. It turned out to be very wrong about that. There were about 5 other people trying to write the same book, so that was a problem that we had to deal with. From there, I kind of spoke to a few people, and you play the Jewish geography game, and that gets you to an agent who you write a proposal for. And the way a proposal works, and I'm only going to bring this up because it's relevant to how the book came out in a way, but you kind of write out what the book would be. So you write out chapter by chapter what you expect, an overview, what your story is going to be, how you would do it, all that stuff. And I had basically pitched this book as a MBA version of Moneyball, which obviously the movie, but also a great book before that. Sam Hinkie's not quite as good looking as Brad Pitt, but it would have worked anyway. And the idea being, so Sam Hinkie, who was sort of the main architect of the process, and I guess I'll give the background. So what makes the Sixers interesting is basically they tanked for a few seasons, meaning they lost games on purpose, not literally, but they built a team to lose. Kind of like if you ever seen Major League, the first Major League movie, where they built a team to lose so they can move to Miami, kind of like that. So they do that, and the idea being that in the NBA, if you, or in most sports, professional sports are funny. People who are absolute free markets people, like owners, they come in and all of a sudden they decide they want more of a socialist structure. So the idea that if you finish last, you should get rewarded with a top pick. So the idea of taking advantage of that. So we're going to lose a bunch of games, get top picks, get superstars, be really good. So they had two superstars around when I started showing up, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. I'm there. I get a proposal, pitch the idea that I'm going to write a book about, Sam Hinkie as Billy Bean character, Moneyball, how they kind of rebuilt and brought this new way of thinking to the NBA. So then I get a book deal, which is great. Go me. Then I email the Sixers and tell them that I'm interested in doing this. And I had a professional relationship with them. The way it works is you email PR staff. And they were very polite, said, congratulations, really good. We've had a lot of people reach out. The number they kept giving me was about 5. That was a number, give or take, throughout the year. About 5 different people who have reached out about writing a book. So we're not going to participate in any of this. The thing to remember with some of this is that the background on it is that they have, and I guess we can get to this in a little bit. They ended up firing or pushing out this guy, Sam Hinkie, who had orchestrated this rebuild. Basically, they were embarrassed by it and they got too heated and hurt the business side of things. And they were sort of embarrassed by that, the whole idea of them being linked to the process, to this idea of tanking, though they were still willing to trademark trust the process, the rallying call, in recent years to make money off of it. So I guess you can be upset about something and also try to make money off something at the same time. So they didn't really want this book written. They weren't ready for the book, and I don't think, and if they did, maybe they wanted somebody who they knew better. So anyway, go back and forth with them. They let me keep my credential, which was nice and professional of them, and I would show up doing my day job, but they would shut down all requests related to the book and go out of their way to tell people not to speak with me. So for example, former employees I would call, and they would, it was made clear that the Sixers had told former employees or reminded them that, buyouts or whatever that included NDAs, those were applicable to book-related interviews. Or if I went up to a player, there's one player who had a decent professional relationship, and told him I'm doing a book, would like to talk. He said, no problem, I'll give you an hour anytime. Come back to him a month later. He says, yeah, the team told me I can't do any book-related interviews. So that was interesting. They kept telling me that it was partly because there were so many people writing books. In the end, there's only one book that came out, and I think the idea of people, it was kind of missed in terms of the difference between a book deal and people who are interested in writing a book. So that's sort of the background. A lot of the background to this is the idea that I didn't have full participation. And it's not a hit job, the book. It's kind of down the middle. I would always joke that I feel like everyone on all sides is going to be upset, which is probably a good place to be. Though I don't think I'm so popular in Sixers land. I haven't gone to a game. I haven't, the book, we talk about this in a second. I guess the book came out March 17th, which is basically when, the NBA shut down, and the NBA, New Rochelle, the rest of New York, everywhere shut down. So I haven't been to a game yet. I haven't seen many of these people since the book came out. I have a feeling I'm gonna have to wait a long time for that. I'm curious. The other guy I should mention is Sam Hinkie, right? He also did not speak to me for the book. Now it sounds like if you're saying now, well, I might care about a book that nobody spoke to you for. It's I'll sell myself a little bit. I spoke to like 175 people. I think it forces you to go digging in other places. and you make extra calls and you kind of find anecdotes that you wouldn't have had otherwise. I can give some examples later. I'll give one example now, right? One example that I'll give is this story. So this former player, his name is Jason Richardson. He was an NBA veteran, and he told me, I spoke to his manager, and his manager told me a story about the time that he, after Sam Hinkie came in and made his first big trade, he traded an all-star Drew Holiday. That was 2013, and essentially signaled that they're going to tear everything down. And after that, Jason Richardson, he's a veteran, and he understands that this means that we're not going to be a good team. He's saying, I'm not sure what this means for me as a veteran on this team. So he goes and has a meeting with Sam Hinkie in his office, and his manager goes there, and they have a meeting, and the manager then relays the story that at the end, Hinkie asks for restaurant recommendations. And they give it to him, and he says, okay, but I'm going to need a back door because I'm going to have to sneak out a back door because everybody in the city is going to hate me. So it's kind of funny and telling, and like those are the stories I like to think, I pat myself on the back, if I may, about this. Those are the stories that you get when you reach out to, not the primary people, but you kind of go, that came from a former player's manager. It ended up being one of the more telling anecdotes in the book. Yes, I do a book. So Hinkie didn't want to speak. He was polite about it. I didn't get upset because I'm not somebody who believes that people are required to speak to me just because I say I'm writing about them. Though he did tell people he knew, like I would text somebody and say, oh, reaching out, they'd say, yeah, a friend of his, okay, we'll do an interview, let's say at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock comes, call them, no answer. It would become clear that Hinkie had told them he'd prefer they don't talk. Again, power to him, a little different. So I had to go around a lot of people. What do you point? So I'm going to go. So anyway, that's the context of the book. I'm proud of it, if I may say so myself. It is out now, available everywhere. And I'm going to read a little part. It's going to pick up, and I'm going to read off my computer. So if you give me a second, because it's easier. So it's one of the stranger stories, and it won't be long, I promise. It's about Markelle Fultz, and for those who know, number one pick, who the Sixers drafted, who essentially forgot how to shoot in the span of a few months. It was one of the weirdest things we've seen like in baseball, where guys get the yips and forget how to throw. We haven't really seen that with players who've shooting. So the story is going to pick up right after he's drafted. And here we go. So the transition to being a pro was going smoothly. Fultz suited up for the Sixers Summer League team in Utah a few weeks after being drafted and looked like the player who had starred for Washington, not the one rattled by the pomp that had welcomed him in Camden. He was fluid and bouncy, his long arms wreaked havoc, and his jumper was smooth. He scored 40 points in 2 games. Any lingering concerns the Sixers had from his poor pre-draft workout were put to rest. Next up was the Las Vegas Summer League. During the third quarter of his first game, Fultz stepped on an opponent's foot and sprained his left ankle. The injury wasn't serious, though it was significant enough for Philadelphia to shut him down. But Fultz didn't like staying off the court, and so during practice time, he'd goof off on the side and figure out funky ways to shoot without putting pressure on his injured foot. Around a week later, while still in Las Vegas, he was cleared to begin shooting normally. He and Lloyd Pierce, a Sixers assistant coach, set up on one side of the team's temporary practice gym during an off day. Fultz launched dozens of jumpers. His form was disjointed, only a few shots went in. I've never seen anything like that before, Pierce told colleagues afterwards. The kid can't shoot. After Summer League, Fultz visited a basketball camp in Las Vegas and, at the request of the Sixers, Peak Performance Project, known as P3, a high-tech training center in Santa Barbara. He then returned to Maryland to pack up his stuff and continue training with Williams and Tappan, who had become his unofficial manager. I'll give the background. Williams is Keith Williams, his former high school coach and sort of a father figure and mentor to him, and Tappan is Kenneth Tappan, one of his best friends. My shot's trash now, Fultz told Tappan. The two went to a gym one day after Fultz returned home from Summer League. Nearly all of his jumpers ricocheted off the rim. He looked rusty and unsure, and he was releasing the ball closer to his chin as opposed to up near his eyes. Williams spent the next 2 months working with him on raising his release point to where it had been in college. We mostly tightened it up, Williams said. There were moments when he'd fall back a bit, but he was shooting fine. While this was going on, Fultz watched as the circle around him, the one that had propelled him to this point, crumbled. It started a week before the draft when he hired Raymond Brothers, a longtime NBA agent, to serve as his representative and attorney. Brothers had spent months wooing Williams, but after the draft, Williams and others around Fultz noticed a change. They first butted heads around Summer League, when Williams, against the advice of brothers and the wishes of the Sixers, advised Fultz to sit until officially signing his contract, something NBA rookies often do. They called me and were like, "What's wrong, Keith?" I was just like, "We don't have a contract. We don't have insurance. He shouldn't play," Williams recalled. I think that rubbed them all the wrong way. A few weeks later, after Summer League, when Fultz made clear that he didn't want to visit P3, brothers told the Sixers that Williams was to blame. He used that as an opportunity to throw the dirt on me, even though Markel's telling him this is stupid, and then Philly gets mad at me, Williams said. He was right. I didn't think he needed to be there, but I can speak for myself. Ebony pushed Williams away too. She took more control of Fultz's schedule and finances. He signed a 4-year rookie deal with the first 2 years and about $15 million guaranteed, and also endorsement deals with Tissot, JBL, and Nike, all of which were negotiated with Williams' help, and the latter of which was reported to be multi-year and worth about 1.5 annually. She'd argue with Williams and Tappan, but also with Markel, whom she continued to view as her baby boy, despite him now being a multi-million-dollar brand. They'd fight over cleaning out storage boxes in the family home. She'd call him dozens of times. One day, after a particularly trying fight with Ebony over his desire to purchase a new car, Fultz met Williams at the gym. "He shot the ball worse than he has in weeks," said an onlooker. Around September, Fultz moved into a house in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. "That's where everything went south," a friend said. Ebony got an apartment downtown, but felt like she needed to exert even more control. Ebony's parents had left her as a child. She was raised by a grandmother, and when she became a mother, she clung tightly to her own children. She'd bring Gatorade to Markel's games for him and his teammates, but she'd also curse out AAU coaches who had the audacity to criticize her son. The pressure of life in and around the NBA only exacerbated these tendencies. She became annoyed if Markel had girls over at night. She installed security cameras around his home. She'd often eavesdrop and sometimes even call to scold Markel about comments she'd overhear. In response, Markel began leaning more on Williams, especially when it came to checking in on nights out, which only angered Ebony more. She would get upset that he was talking She would get upset that he were talking to him and not her, even though it was her that said, "Make sure everybody knows where you're at," said the friend. Once he moved up to Philly, her whole energy just started to change. Williams stayed back in the Baltimore area, but drove up frequently to the work with Markel, early in the mornings at the Sixers training facility, and in the evenings at a local gym, and was confused by what he was seeing. Fultz's form was deteriorating. A small hitch had developed. He'd bring the ball up toward his face and pause before pushing it forward. "It's like somebody's holding my arms down when I'm lifting them to shoot," Fultz told Williams and Tappan. Williams, searching for answers, instructed Fultz to shoot while lying on the gym floor or by dribbling the ball into a shot to create a rhythm, anything to help reset his muscle memory. The Sixers were becoming aware that Fultz had a problem. One morning in early September, Brown approached Williams at the facility. "What do you think is going on?" he asked Williams. "It's mental, Brett," Williams replied. He told Brown he was working to fix Fultz's release point. One more paragraph. It didn't matter. Looking for someone to blame, Ebony turned to Ayrton Tappan. It didn't matter that he'd grown up with Markel, spent years playing ball with him and accompanying him to buy G-Star clothes at the mall. It didn't matter that he'd always considered Ebony a second mom, or that he and Fultz had recently gotten matching tattoos on the outside of their calves. Ebony didn't like how Tappan encouraged the 19-year-old Markel to act independently, or how he told her that Markel needed space, or how he tried explaining why there was nothing wrong with Markel's new Cherry Hill neighbors, excitedly wishing him luck on the street or leaving welcome to the neighborhood gifts of Chick-fil-A, which Fultz had publicly expressed his affinity for on his doorstep. "We need someone who's going to keep Kel in the gym, and you're not mature enough," she told him. A couple weeks after they moved in, Ebony printed dozens of flyers for Tappan to put in their neighbors' mailboxes, asking them to stop bothering her son. Tappan only distributed them to families that he thought had kids, which led to a fight, which led to her offering Markel an ultimatum: Tappan or her. Tappan, knowing Fultz had no choice, moved out. That night, Ebony and Williams met Markel at his home. Before long, Markel and Ebony were yelling at each other. Crying, Markel ran out of the house and into the street, barely avoiding a streaking car. Williams chased after him. "The money did all this," Markel, tears streaking down his face, sniveled to Williams. I don't want this no more. You should have left me in college." So I'll say one more thing and then we can take questions. So I just think that's a good example. So I guess I should have said this before. So the book, instead of being more about Moneyball, it ended up being more about kind of the back room, not more like Moneyball, more of a Moneyball-like book. It ended up, I think, being more about the back room stuff. I kind of call it just a book about how the NBA works and how all these things that go on behind the scenes sort of lead to what we end up seeing on the court. So with that, I'm happy to take questions if we have any. If not, I will not be offended.
Yeah, so folks can put some questions into the little Q&A box. We're waiting. I actually had a quick question myself for you, Yaron. I think we have some students, some Ramaz high school students who are in our viewership tonight. And I wanted to ask you how you got into sports writing, just like at the beginning. I know you've been writing for various magazines for many years, and you've been at Bleacher for a handful as well. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you got into sports writing.
Yeah, I love sports growing up. I played. It wasn't great, but I played. So I went to NYU and actually majored in sports management. I went with the intention of doing so, but I quickly learned, I wanted to make a GM on that side, but I quickly learned the business side of things wasn't for me. Just not how my brain works or not things I'm interested in. So I figured, okay, I was always half decent at writing. I figured I would try that. At the beginning, it was a lot of, I call it probably a lot of bad Bill Simmons impersonations in terms of my writing and weird blogs about stuff that probably nobody cared to read. But from there, and then you just kind of do the thing where, so I worked at a local paper, the Journal News in Westchester, and covered high school and girls basketball, girls cheerleading. I've never been yelled at more. I think the moms of girls cheerleaders yelled at me more than Sixers people. And did that. And then I started, again, more Jewish geography and got me into Dorrit Slam magazine and keep interning and freelancing and pitching. And then the story that kind of, while that's all going on, I was kind of taking other odd jobs like teaching Hebrew school and things. And then the story that kind of made a difference for me at Bleacher Report was kind of where are they now on this former player named Adam Morrison. He was like a number 3 pick, a former college star, and his NBA career never took off. And he let me come out to Spokane, Washington, and hang out with him. And we went shooting. He took me to his gun range and playing golf for a day and followed him around for a day. And the story was pretty good, if I may say so myself. And that kind of got me in the door of Bleacher Report and pushed me to here. So that would be the super Cliff Notes version.
Incredible. Did you ever meet Hinkie in person? We had someone ask that.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Yes, we spoke on the phone. We met once in person at the, every year there's this thing called the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. It's kind of like a sports nerds conference, so a bunch of analytic people and sports math people. And now a lot of the NBA shows up. And it's great. I love it. So I went there last year, and he's one of the, the half jokes / legend / stories. He was on a panel one year. Him and Obama were both on panels, not the same panel, but the same year. And people say Hinkie got a louder ovation just because that's his people. So anyway, I went up to him and introduced myself, and he's a different kind of guy. He's straight, the best way to, unique. He's the literal definition of unique applies to him. He's somebody who he's very Silicon Valley-like and lives in Silicon Valley now and embraces that type of thinking. But he's also from a small town in Oklahoma and was a high school sports star in Oklahoma. So that's, I don't know how many people in Silicon Valley are from a small town in Oklahoma, just to give an idea. So I went up to him and introduced myself, and he was nice, and he was friendly but distant. It was strange. We spoke for a few minutes, and then one of his friends who was there, who I never met before, suggested to me that I get a vasectomy because I have 2 kids and he has 3, and I thought that was strange, but and at the end, we made some jokes about, you're away for the weekend. The most we connected was, don't tell your wife how late you sleep. Sorry, Micole, how late you sleep when you're on the road. That's a big no-no. You always have the phone. You always answer the phone wide awake. But it was really just like a 7-minute conversation, not even. And then I kind of, the whole conference, I would follow him around, but if I spotted him, I would kind of go and slink over and kind of see what he's doing, and ended up getting some good stuff for the book about hearing him talking to his friends, asking where former players of his were that he didn't know were still in the league, stuff like that. So yes, I met him. We've spoken a few times. I can't say we're particularly close.
So I think we'll end with this multi-part question. So can you tell us a little bit more about the sources that you have in your book, some of the players. Do you have a favorite player that you hung out with or were able to spend time with? And maybe a little bit as well about how you were able to overcome the sort of icing out that Hinkie tried to play with some of the players when you were trying to talk to people and they were, or some of the folks that you were trying to talk to and they weren't returning your calls. So just sort of like a little insider talk.
Sure. So the way you do it, I mean, so I'm always like, people always ask, did you talk to player X, Y, and Z? And my answer is always no, no, no. For the most part, you know, I've had a few conversations during the season, but nothing in depth. So what you do is you just make a list of everybody, right? That's kind of what goes. It sounds boring, but you just go through like old media guides and look through every assistant coach, scout, whatever. You make a list of everyone and try to find contacts for them and talk to other people they might know and kind of just keep making the circle bigger and bigger and see who's spoken to who. And people are pretty chatty or gossipy with one another, so you kind of get contacts and go back. So that's that. Like some of my best sources were like random people, like a former, like, you know, security guard, stuff like that, or like an agent, or like kind of people on the periphery. One player, this guy named TJ McConnell, was helpful. I don't know if you realized how helpful he was. The way it works for a game is you kind of a locker room is open to media for about 45 minutes before every game. Some players hang out there. Some players prefer to avoid the media. TJ McConnell, who's he was an undrafted point guard who was with the Sixers for a few years, was one who was, he would always be there. And he would, you know, I would ask him, I never did any full sit down interviews with him, but I would just kind of ask him random questions. He would kind of be fill in. So, you know, I'd come in and say, do you remember in 2015 when player X was traded? What do you remember about that practice? And he was game for all that stuff. I don't even know how many times I might not quote him much in the book, but it was just particularly helpful just to have some firsthand answers for questions like that.
Okay, and did you want to maybe talk a little bit more about how you overcame some of the icing that may have happened with folks who weren't returning your calls or anything like that?
Oh yeah, well, it's fun. I mean, some people do, right? It's like so I made a decision early on that I'd be okay not quoting people, not using their names. That made people feel comfortable. So yeah, I mean, that's some people just, you know, two types of people, right? There's the sources who like you realize you don't necessarily need and it's not worth going after. I should say the three. They're the sources who then like you can tell they're not upset when they see your name pop up on the screen when you call. Those are the best. And then they're the ones who they don't want to talk to you, but you really need them. And I just have a strategy and simple. And just I just bother you nonstop. Like I'll set an email reminder that, you know, I email you and then the email will pop back in my inbox 4 days later if you don't respond. And I'll just keep that going for 3-4 months, or text messages or calls. And they might not be happy, but sometimes that works to get people on the phone for 25 minutes. And that won't be the start of a long-term relationship, but it could make a difference. You know, you put 3 of those together and that's 90 minutes of interviews, and that makes a big difference.
Okay, well, thank you, Micole and Yaron. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Just a reminder, we have a call with Rabbi Lickstein tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. You should have some information in your inboxes soon. We also have a full week of live and recorded programming next week. So you can check us out on Facebook and Instagram, Ramaz Alumni, and you can check Yaron and Micole out as well. We'll make sure to include the link to purchase Yaron's book, Tanking to the Top, in our description when we post this video on YouTube. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope to see many of you tomorrow night, and have a wonderful rest of your week and a wonderful Shabbat. Have a great night.
Thank you.